Afghanistan, the Taliban. If you're around my age, then your first impression of them might have been this. Or you might remember these images being broadcast around the world in 2022. But for better or for worse, they're back. It's definitely for worse. But one of the strangest phenomenon has been the return of influencers to Afghanistan who are looking for their most valued resource: content.
Get your clicks, and you make your money propping up an evil regime.
But don't get me wrong, I'm one of them. Yes, here's a photo of me sat with several members of the regime. What can I say? They brew an excellent cup of tea. And I created content. I hoped it would be my big break. I thought that it might skyrocket me to fame, money, and Kalashnikovs. The problem was that even by the time I got there in the middle of 2024, I was too late. The tally boom of content was over, and I'd missed it. But it's still a big reason that influencers go. Content, of course it's content. Afghanistan is one of the craziest countries in the world. As a country, Afghanistan is novel to the general public. It is a place most famous for being riddled with war and extremely inaccessible, and that is something that influencers know. The theory goes that you're more likely to get good engagement by shaking hands with the Taliban than by sharing a beach in Thailand. The algorithm just prefers it. Now, don't get me wrong, beaches in Thailand are great, but a lot of people have been there, and travel content is in general extremely saturated, especially in those more visited destinations. And that means that a lot of influencers have had really big success by gaming the system with RPG-laden videos. And then there are influencers like me. But even I got to the point where I cared more about the content than the experience that I was living. Just take this clip, for example. This man has just pretended to rob me at gunpoint because I guess that's a hilarious joke. But what was my reaction? Was it, oh my God, I could have been killed? No, it was, oh my God, my camera wasn't filming. Above all else, I was just annoyed for hours afterwards that I'd missed my viral Afghanistan moment. So one part of the content is the novelty. It's the big flags, it's the swans, it's the guns, it's the knockoff energy drinks, it's everything we've just discussed. But another is the natural beauty of Afghanistan. You know, I'll be real with you. 10 years ago, I thought this was a dust bowl in the middle of nowhere with a couple of guys living in tents. And 5 years ago, I thought it was some guys living in caves fighting with Navy SEALs. But now I've actually been, and I was so wrong. Afghanistan is one of the most beautiful countries on the planet. From the mountains to the lakes to the cities themselves, there is so much that is worth seeing. But historically, there's not been a lot online showing this beauty. And I feel like a lot of creators recognize this gap in the market as much as they recognize the gap around things like the regime. The narrative around Afghanistan is no longer being told through war reporting, and that has very much opened up a space for people to share a bit more about the country itself beyond the wars. And I am genuinely glad that there is more footage available of its natural beauty now than there ever has been in the past. And this brings me nicely onto the final form of content I'd like to discuss: gonzo journalism. When the US packed up their bags and left a few years ago, there was a huge influx of mainstream media attention into Afghanistan. But then the war in Ukraine broke out, and then the war in Gaza broke out, and Afghanistan was simply pushed out of the news cycle, much like everything is eventually. It seemed like less people were interested in it, so fewer media outlets were reporting on it, and then even fewer journalists were willing to wander into the center of Kabul to ask the new regime about their economic policy. This has left an information vacuum on the ground that I think a lot of influencers are trying to fill in one way or the other. I mean, don't get me wrong, not every jabroni with a GoPro is Hunter S. Thompson, but there is a long-standing tradition of people going off their own back to dangerous parts of the world to show what is happening there, especially places where mainstream journalism has abandoned. This is undoubtedly part of the reason why I personally visited Afghanistan. I don't like to make opinions on countries until I've visited them myself, and I then like to share the experiences I have with people around the world. And I think a lot of other creators have had a similar idea to me, that you go to Afghanistan for the extraordinary content, but then you tell yourself that that content means something. When I first stumbled over the Friendship Bridge and into Afghanistan, I had one goal in mind: speak to as many people as I possibly could. Not just because I love the sound of my own voice, I mean I obviously do, but because I knew I was entering a country where the people had a worldview so far removed from my own, and this was a chance to better understand them. And I found out that the average Afghan has hopes and dreams and passions just like any of the rest of us. I mean, just look at this guy and his love of carpet.
Afghanistan carpet is different. Mazar carpet different, Iraq carpet, Afghanistan style carpet. In Mazar carpet is always new. Carpet is always old. Afghanistan carpet is always handmade. Only carpet.
I strongly believe that a lot of influencers are doing the exact same thing. These are people who thrive on sharing the relationships they build online with online communities that they've grown over the course of years or sometimes decades. This becomes even more important to consider when you remember the fact that Afghanistan has been somewhat abandoned by mainstream media, and if it wasn't for influencers, then it probably wouldn't appear in your feed at all. And a lot of the Afghan people are wonderful and deserve to have that platform. Take, for instance, this man who literally would not take my money. I had to force it into his hand because I was his guest. This happened to me all the time, and for people who are often characterized by war, I found them to be nothing but kind, welcoming, and really, really hospitable. And I think that a lot of the footage that's been coming out of this country recently helps remind us that the people are not necessarily a representation of the regime that they are under. In fact, I can think of one other country right now where I think the average citizen might not necessarily want to be associated with the guy who's in charge.
This is a tough hurricane. One of the wettest we've ever seen from the standpoint of water.
But there is a big problem with this, because for every influencer who gets pictured grinning with the Taliban, it does feed into their PR campaign, whether we like it to or not. For a foreign traveler, Afghanistan is surprisingly easy to access. They give out visas like they're candy, and even if you're a woman from a Western society, they are more than happy to have you come to their country. They encourage content creation, and I did feel like the Taliban were giving me special treatment whenever I encountered them. And it would be pretty naive to say that's a coincidence or that it's not a part of their effort to encourage tourism or make the country look safer. Having said that, I do think that the notion that having influencers in your country gives legitimacy is fundamentally flawed in quite a lot of ways. It might improve their PR with certain people who see Afghanistan on social media, but it then becomes the responsibility of each individual creator to make the human rights violations occurring in the country abundantly clear. But fundamentally, on the international stage, creators are not currency. International governments will not start dealing with the Taliban if Kai Cenat and Belle Delphine come to town. What is much harder for someone like me to rectify is the financial argument. When I paid for my visa, I was putting money directly into the back pocket of the Taliban, and there is simply no way around that. And the same goes for the various permits that I needed to acquire, or the multiple times that I was required to tip the government for their protection. But an important point to remember is that the victims of economic isolation are usually a country's citizens, more so than their government. And for every dollar that I gave to the Taliban, I was giving many more to local guides, restaurants, shopkeepers, random people in the street, whoever I happened to see that day. There are a heck of a lot of really hardworking people in Afghanistan, and they deserve that foreign tourist income. And does that make the other side of things okay? Of course not. But it does complicate it a little bit. And then what complicates it even further is the fact that I heard a lot of Afghans say things like this.
Came about 7 years ago.
Oh, so before the change of regime.
It's much better.
Yeah. You think it's better now? While I was there, I spoke to a lot of Afghans about the Taliban, and one thing that kept coming up was the fact that they'd rather work with their current regime to try and improve it from the inside than having another foreign power come and impose themselves. And can you blame them? From Alexander the Great to Genghis Khan to the British Empire to the Soviet Union and then to the modern day US, the Afghan people have consistently been the victim of superpowers. A lot of Afghan people now seem to think that the most effective route to change is discourse with younger Taliban officials who they believe are far more open to that kind of progressive change than the older generation of Taliban members who are in charge currently but won't be around forever. Now, why am I talking about all of this? It's because at best an influencer plays a small role in that discourse, but there is still a role to be played by foreigners. In fact, I know a lot of other people who have also been to Afghanistan, and they are good people. You don't become some sort of morally corrupt ghoul just for entering the country. I also wanted to share this gentleman right here with you. He told me about how when he and his wife are at home, they are equals. They make all of the decisions together. They manage the household together. But when they are in public, they have to keep up a facade to keep the Taliban happy. And yet he too thought that the best way to bring about change was not a violent revolution or foreign imposition, but by working with the current regime. I do think influencers can help with this wider discourse, and I think that some people go with that in mind. But I don't think that every reason is that noble. I like adventure, I like danger, I like doing idiotic things because I think that they're fun. I'm really bad at paying attention in museums, and I will always be certified mountain gang. You can probably see where I'm going with this. I remember only a handful of years ago, I was quite scared about going to Estonia on my own, but look at this place. Look, it's like a fairy tale. What is the worst thing that could happen here? Attacked by a troll? Imprisoned by a tyrannical king? Flash forward to a couple of months ago, and I was devastated to hear that I didn't make the cut for a North Korea group trip. I really wanted a souvenir poster. But that is how quickly your mindset towards travel can change. The more you do it, the harder it is to find novel experiences. I have had this similar conversation with plenty of other travelers, both those who create content and those who don't, and they say pretty much the exact same thing. It kind of comes with the territory and also helps to explain why you'll find channels go from videos like 10 hidden gems in Portugal to 48 hours in the cartel's backyard. This is where the creator to danger tourism pipeline can really begin to take shape, because when you build an audience and a viewership based on going to more and more extreme destinations, you have to keep satisfying that audience or you're going to lose the algorithm. You can think of it a little bit like a sorting hat, and once the algorithm has sorted you into house feckless moron, it's kind of hard to get out of that again. Of course, the notion of danger and actual danger are two very, very different things. I remember at one point being allowed onto a Taliban base, and when I entered, it was full of tanks and Hummers and other things that they'd pilfered from the Americans when they left, and there was a huge pile of guns just lying on the floor, and all of the Taliban members were gathered around a volleyball net. Now, I wasn't allowed to record in there, obviously, so you're gonna have to enjoy my artist's rendition of what this looked like. But what do you think their reaction was when I arrived? Do you think they were annoyed, confused as to why some random white guy was there? No. They smiled, welcomed me, and then just went back to playing volleyball. So was I actually in danger? Well, insurance companies didn't seem to think I was. The company that I was with was insuring me for around $5 a day for both health insurance and life insurance, which certainly suggests they did not think I was in any risk of being blown to pieces. But I partly just wanted some good stories to tell over a beer, and regardless of whether or not I was actually in any danger, the Taliban volleyball story is a humdinger. Even if the response from my friends is usually, oh yeah. Anyway, did you see the game last night? The gap between perception and reality is also clear as day on YouTube. I am sure that you have seen plenty of thumbnails of creators stood with pissed off looking Taliban members who are armed to the teeth, and yet none of them seem to ever get into any actual trouble. And yet the algorithm does not care, because it still comes across as something dangerous, novel, and well outside of the everyday experience for an average viewer, and so it is rewarded. And so all of that is pretty much to say that I think there's a strong argument to make that Afghanistan is actually not that dangerous. For us. It's time to talk about the elephant in the room, or to be more accurate, it's about who was never in the room to begin with.
Yeah, one thing I've not really had a chance to talk about yet, and I'm going to keep my voice down, is women and women in public places. So if you look around here, there is pretty much exclusively men, and that is certainly the case in places like this, parks, mosques, any sort of like landmark, that there's no women allowed. And even in the street, you see probably a ratio of, I'd say, 10 to 1, men to women. Women are very much stuck inside. And you certainly don't see them working. Like, every single job is done by a man. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's like tailor or bloody farmer.
Whether creators go to Afghanistan intending to address the issue of women or not, I think it's the part that is most easy to avoid. You can sweep that elephant under a suitably large Afghan rug. But to be clear, there are some creators who do a really good job of talking about this issue. They don't sugarcoat it, they're pretty honest about the situation, and they do a way better job than the speech that I just gave about like tailors or farmers or whatever. A more alarming trend are the number of videos I've seen where creators say things like, Afghanistan is actually full of women, they're everywhere, they're in the streets, you can see them in public spaces. The issue is that I can't record them, because that is culturally insensitive, and that is why they don't really appear much in my videos. What Afghanistan were you in? This video is full of grey areas. I've tried to explain why an influencer might visit Afghanistan, but then also discuss the morality behind it, which is very subjective. But this, I would say, is the one black and white part of the entire argument. These are the people who go there and then deliberately downplay what is happening in Afghanistan in their content. And this is something that does happen, they do exist. And if you're someone who does that, then you are a fucking Taliban cuck. The worst part is that I doubt these people are even getting paid by the Taliban. They are not particularly cash flush, and they need to invest their money in smarter things like banning chess. So all that you're actually getting from whitewashing the situation is better views and more engagement from people online who probably don't know what the actual situation is, so take your content at face value, which quite frankly is fucking pathetic. Under Taliban rule, there have been 80 edicts over the past few years which have systemically removed women from everyday public life. This is just a fact. There is no arguing this point. In fact, the only women that I personally saw out alone in the street without a male guardian were beggars, and I asked my guide about this, and he put it this way. He said, they're not allowed to work, they're not allowed to remarry, so they beg. So I guess the Taliban, perhaps recognizing they put these women in a catch-22, these widows can't marry a breadwinner, and they also can't make their own money, they've given them the liberty of being allowed to beg in the streets. I did get one notable exception to this general lack of access. I was allowed to speak to a girls' orphanage in one of the towns I stayed in. And that was great because I got to speak to them about everything from how we celebrate Christmas in England to how the process of tattooing works, which they were very curious about. And then I showed them a picture of my younger sister, which blew their minds, not only because she was out and about on her own, but because she was wearing jeans. One of the girls in particular was especially bright, and she wanted to study at Oxford, and it was really nice because my brother actually studied there, which meant I got to tell her a little bit about the city, a little bit about the process of applying for a place like that, and I also got to tell her that they have a really shit football team. But let's be real, do I think because I had the chance to speak to her about UCAS applications that she is magically now going to get to study at one of the best universities in the world? Of course not. But they were shocked and clearly very delighted to hear me tell them that women in the UK are free to do whatever they want, that they are academics, they are politicians, they are lawyers, they are doctors, they get to choose their own path in life. And what I think is actually really interesting to note is that they are not alone in their desire to be educated. A recent UN survey in Afghanistan showed that 92% of average citizens, men and women, wanted women to be in secondary education. It is the Taliban who are preventing it. Ironically, if I was going to use every single interaction I had in Afghanistan as content, then I think the conversation that I had with the orphan girls would be the best I had by far. And this time the camera was running. I've got that entire hour-long conversation on film. But I've never actually shared it. And I don't think I ever will. Look, honestly, anyone who goes to Afghanistan is going to have their own reasons for doing it because it's not exactly the type of place that you just stumble into by accident. And being honest, I think that the majority of creators who go there do genuinely have good intentions. I think it's a very, very small minority who are going there just to peddle bullshit for views. Most want to show Afghans as ordinary human beings, and they want to share their stories from a country that has been repeatedly failed by the rest of the world. Does that make the moral dilemma okay? No, it just makes it a little bit harder to resolve. I had wonderful experiences in Afghanistan. I met some of the kindest people I've ever seen, and that will live with me forever. Does that then negate the human rights violations that are taking place there? Not even in the slightest. And I think maybe the best way that I can frame this entire video is to say that before I actually visited Afghanistan, I was pretty concerned about whether I could get into the country, whether I could meet the Taliban, whether I could see it all for myself. I never really bothered to think about whether or not I should.